Dr. Steve Turley, thank you so much for being on my show today.
Oh, it's my honor, Stephen. Great to be with you, my friend.
I have been looking forward to this for about 2 months now. And, I'm a big fan of
You
your
have to get
channel.
out more, Stephen. You have to get out more, I think.
Well, I use your channel. As you know, I try to stay neutral when it comes to politics but I go to certain sources for right-leaning media and left-leaning, and I have found you to be a reputable source. And so I've been watching your channel for about 2 years now. And so I'm
Thank you.
excited to dive in on some of these topics about these government leaders that just want to view us as enemies and exert authority over us. And so we'll jump into that. But because there's a lot of people that may not know who you are, let me just do a brief introduction of you. That way they know why they should listen to you and consider signing up for your channel as well as continuing to watch mine. But for those of you that don't know, Dr. Steve Turley is an internationally recognized author, speaker, and talk show host. You guys have a podcast. You've personally authored over 20 books during your career, and you have a YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers where people come from all over the world, but especially right here in the United States to learn about populism, nationalism, and the big stories affecting our country right now. So the thing that I want to get into today is more and more I noticed during the lockdowns that it seemed like the government started to view people as the enemy or as something to control versus a group to have care over. I don't know if you felt any of that. When the pandemic first started, it was like, okay, I'm going to tell people about stimulus checks and the PPP loans and all of that. And then I just got inundated with the humanity of my channel, where it was people really struggling, and they were in cities where they were being locked down. They were telling them, rat out your neighbor, tell on your neighbor, we'll shut them down, we'll turn off the water, we'll ruin their weddings. And in the beginning, nobody really knew what a lot of this was. But I was living here in Utah, where we basically remained open the whole time. And it was a very different experience from, say, like San Francisco, California, or New York. But what is the deal around the globe with governments feeling like they need to exercise authority over us all the time?
Well, certainly in the West, it's largely the byproduct of what's known as globalism, and we've been living under a globalist-like system that started to emerge right after, formally right after World War II. It's known as the rules-based order or the Western liberal order. And basically what it is, I mean, there's all kinds of like conspiracy theories behind globalism, but the way globalist scholars like Anthony Giddens, the British scholar, would define it, vast interlocking mechanism of technology and telecommunications that creates, in effect, a single worldwide political and economic system. And that's the key. That last word, in the midst of all of that, that last word is so key. We don't so much live in a civilization anymore. We live in a system. And that's what scholars have noticed. A globalism is basically a system, not a culture, not a civilization. And as a system, it operates by standardization around very set protocols. And those protocols are all rooted in technology and telecommunications and the like. And so those who oversee the system are what we call technocrats. And technocrats belong to the expert class that supposedly has the competency to run such a complex system. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out, but scholars have thought about this for over a century. One of the things that makes technology is control. right? Because we have thermostats, or because we have on and off buttons, or whatever it happens to be, our washing machines, our dishwashers, you name it, our cars, the keys. Technology allows us to control things, right? As a matter of fact, it's one of the arguments for why it was particularly the 19th century that slavery waned in Europe and the United States. Of course, we had a whole war on it, but it's not because we necessarily became suddenly these enlightened moral people. It's we started developing machines. The Industrial Revolution replaced, as it were, the slave, you see. So what we find is the more and more technocratic our society becomes, the more and more we become objects of control. That's kind of the inner logic of what's happening there. So we're not governed by, as despotic as it may sound, we're not governed by kings and monarchs who were not so despotic. Their powers tended to be relatively limited. They were, they were private landowners who were just the most sacred and the highest of landowners, generally speaking. They tended to have very limited power. No, we're living in a time that has no recourse to culture, or no recourse to tradition or custom or anything like that. We're living in a time that's very stale, and it's stale because it's standardized, like the flight speech we get right before any time we take off in an airplane. Everything is as a matter of fact, you probably can't even remember any specific airplane you've been on, because they're all the same. And the trips are all the same, basically, unless the trip itself, wherever you were going, was particularly memorable. Everything is standardized. Even the pilot's voice, if you ever notice that, they train their voice to talk a certain way, where it's supposed to have an inflection of calmness and competence so as to relax you. Because we live in a society like that, we are increasingly subject to rulers who operate as managers, not as, monarchs, as it were, defending the true, the good, and the beautiful, and the sacred royal tradition of our forefathers or anything. They could care less about any of that. All they care about is managing the system. We're cogs within the system, and therefore we are legitimate objects of control.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting way to put it, where as things that have advanced, then we're just another object to control, and they don't see us as having a soul or a unique identity. Nope. It's you're somebody that needs to comply. Right. And so it's like almost it's so anti-American in a way, where it's
it is.
Listen, we want you to have freedom of speech, but we really want you to say our words,
right.
Right. with your own will, And
That's
so
right.
they tried to bend all of us into that. And I think for some parts of the country, it took 2 years to wake up and go, wait a minute, I don't know that I was being led down the correct path. And then you probably saw this just in the last 10 days or so. President Emmanuel Macron says we need a single world government. Like, how do we run this world that's been running itself for thousands of years if we don't have one ring to rule them all?
Right.
And then my question as an American is, who's going to be the single world ruler? I don't want to live like China. I don't want to live like North Korea. Heck, there's parts of Canada that I don't even want to live like, Right. And so how do we maybe explain a little bit more about this populist uprising that we're starting to see in the United States, in different parts of Europe? I'm seeing like Hungary is returning to these traditional family values. They're saying we're going to collapse as a civilization if we don't focus on the people. And so they're now having to craft legislation around people and families, where before it's been crafted around corporations. So maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a very, very good. So to frame it, as part of this globalist structure that we're living in, there's an inherent dynamic known as disembedding. And what disembedding does is it involves dislodging local, how should I put it? It dislodges economic, political, social control away from the local and reconfigures it at the translocal, at that level of the expert class, the technocrat and the like. Again, you have to remember the way the globalist system holds together is very different than the way a nation has historically been held together. A nation is generally held together, a society in general is held together by culture. That's the nature of culture. Culture is the connective tissue that binds society together. Common language, common calendar, common fashion array, and the like, common goals, rules, understandings, and the like. That culture holds society together. But by definition, globalism is transcultural. It's supposed to take over the world. It has no frontiers. So it's held together more by transcultural technologies and telecommunications. And what that tends to do, the technical term for it beyond disembedding, is it deterritorializes our lives. It takes more and more political control away from the local and centralizes it around this managerial technocratic class. So globalism, just by its nature, just like corporations, by its nature is centralizing. That's just what it does. So like a one world government, you don't need a conspiracy. You just need to follow the dynamics to understand it. A one world government is actually very much part of the logic of globalism. But the problems we've gone through, or going through, I should say, two structural revolutions that have been happening over the last several decades, that's basically bringing this globalist system to a halt. The first one is more ideological, or I should say theoretical. It's moving away from a modernist conception of the world, out of which globalism came, to what scholars call a postmodernist conception of the world. And modernism, just very simply, is the notion that scientific rationalism can basically explain and do everything. It's the notion that we can have a one-size-fits-all political and economic system rooted in dispassionate and objective scientific rationalism. That was very popular among the Enlightenment philosophers in the 18th century. It started to get a kind of social plausibility during the Industrial Revolution and the whole process of urbanization and the like. And then in the 20th century, it offered, via globalism, sort of a system of hope to bring the world together and stop all wars. Now, there was another globalist modernist ideology called communism. That was what gave us the Cold War. So there were actually two, well, there were technically three. Fascism was a third, but it got destroyed in World War II, at least in its formal structure. So that modernist world, that scientific rationalism can solve everything, that died. It's died philosophically in the hearts and minds of most Westerners. I've been a prof for 20 years before I became a full-time YouTuber. I have never heard a single student in my classroom ever try to argue that scientific rationalism was the one true way of understanding the world. That breakup of that meta-narrative is what we call postmodernism. And so we've gone from a modernist era that tend to focus on ideology, that this ideal that we can actually create a single political and economic system. That's cracked, and now we're moving into an age of identity. That's very key. And one of the reasons why it seems to be happening is because of the second revolution. We've moved away from what's called mass society, and we're moving towards a network society that you and I are benefiting from right this very minute.
Yeah.
So a mass society is a society that developed around the Industrial Revolution that recalibrated society around mass urban areas. So at the beginning of the 19th century, 90% of our population in the United States was rural. At the end of the 19th century, 90% was urban, right?
Wow.
That's when we started creating the suburbia, right? Especially after World War II. So even suburbia is still part of that connective element we would call urban area, cosmopolitan area. All our big media comes out of that, right? New York Times, LA Times, Washington Post, San Francisco Chronicle, Chicago Tribune, Baltimore Sun. We could go on and on, right? So the big city became the centerpiece of mass society. Big cities are also the place where you find cosmopolitan liberal values. So that's where you start to see cosmopolitan liberal values take over the cultural centers of our nation. The problem there is that society has been moving away from that into something called a network society. Again, very organically and so forth. And a network society means that we're no longer connected by virtue of our relationship to these big city centers. We're connected actually through networks like the internet, just like what you and I are doing, what we do every day on YouTube, right? Yeah. Where we connect with millions of people, not because we're in a specific location. We could be anywhere, but it's really neat because mass society was very location specific. If I wanted to make it in the country music industry, I'd have to go to Nashville. If I want to make it in gambling, I have to go to Las Vegas. If I wanted to make it in movies, I'd have to go out to LA, Hollywood, right? But now with the network society, if I want to make it in country music, all I need is a guitar and a webcam. Yeah. I don't need it, right? If I want to make it in movies and so I could create my own movies now. I could be my own content creator. And we're seeing that with independent content creation. They don't need Hollywood anymore. So this is the fascinating thing about a network society. What the network society is ultimately doing is it is decentralizing and dispersing knowledge and information, particularly digital information, and the dynamics, the power dynamics that are surrounding it. And it's relocalizing those dynamics. It's going through an incredible sort of democratization of dynamics. So today, everybody with a cell phone is a cameraman. Everybody with a social media platform is a commentator and a pundit. I don't need NBC or ABC or CBS. I don't need the New York Times. Anytime there is some massive event that happens, the first video we see of that event is not from a satellite truck with 3 letters and a number, connected to it, right? It's from somebody's phone. So, and then before it gets to the news, it got loaded up on their social media platform. So they became NBC. They became ABC. So they used to have a monopoly over information because everything was centralized around urban areas in accordance with this globalist-like structure. We're now existing more and more in an age everywhere, all over the world, where that's being decentralized and democratized. And what that's doing is it's reawakening localized sentiments again of custom, culture, tradition, all the hallmarks of identity. People have left ideology and they're going back to identity. Who am I? What's the tribe I belong to? It's regional, it's racial, it's religious, combinations thereof. And that's producing this massive populist backlash against an old, tired Jurassic globalism that doesn't make much sense anymore, theoretically, going from modern to postmodern, and practically going from mass society to the network society.
Yeah. Well, and I think people appreciate it because you and I don't filter our news through a bunch of lawyers. We don't filter it through a committee or, oh, I wonder what our big pharma sponsor that gives us $20 million is gonna think if I say this or that. Like, it's just you and me with a camera saying, right, here's what's in the news, here's the story, and then taking time to intelligently unravel the details so that it makes sense for people. But I see that all the time. I spoke with someone just the other night and they said, I don't even watch the news anymore, right, because it's just the same thing. It's the same repeat cycle over and over, yep, again. And yep, if you go to one group, they have an agenda based off of their advertisers. If you go to the other side, they have an agenda based off their advertisers. And so this this populist uprising has been very interesting for me to watch here in the United States, within my own state of Utah, over in Europe. It's been very interesting to watch, but at the same time, and you know this just like I do, you have these unelected billionaires within the World Economic Forum that they are whispering in the ears of government leaders.
Oh yeah.
And they're trying to extend this control by being unelected people that then have control over us. And so you have the World Economic Forum saying, hey, government, you should not allow people to own cars anymore. You should get rid of fossil fuels immediately, even though we don't have anything to replace it. And if it gets super expensive, who cares? Let the people suffer, right?
That's right. Let them drive Teslas. Yes.
Yeah, they can eat bugs, and we will co-parent with you. We will tell you what values to have, not your tradition, your family, your religion, your culture. The government will tell you, And so, what are your thoughts on the World Economic Forum? Are they as big of a threat as I believe they are, or are they maybe a bigger threat to countries other than the United States?
No, actually, I think their threat is huge here, particularly with the well, I guess one of the advantage we have is we have a Wall Street class and we have a Washington class. They're not necessarily the same. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. And Davos has to play between those two, so they can at least put some temperament or some they can temper down Davos's effects here, or their influences here. It's really primarily Europe. That's and they're suffering right now big time, just with the thermostat for sure going on with the coming winter and the insane fuel costs and food costs and the like, and the shortages and so on, because they've refused, through the green agenda being pushed by the WEF, they haven't been investing in their own fossil fuel production. So thank you, Greta, right? No, they're bad stuff. So this is all part of globalism. So globalism is this vast interlocking technology of vast interlocking mechanism of technology and telecommunications. Part of that technology and telecommunications, part of it is finance and corporate capitalism. And it's actually interesting because it fits together through this notion of lifestyle values. So the more society gets disembedded from localized control and gets more put in translocal categories, the more it gets what's called de-traditionalized. So globalist societies are liberal by their very nature. Traditions lose their plausibility because traditions are rooted in family and community and soil and the like. And so the more technological we become, the less, and also because this notion of scientific rationalism is the one true way of understanding all things, and that creates this ridiculous science-religion dichotomy, a statement that's neither scientific nor religious. So what you end up doing is you end up reimagining the human person inside a globalist society as a person defined by lifestyle values. And lifestyle values are, you basically get to exercise, so they say, your own sovereign autonomy over your life. Now, of course, that's come under radical assault of late, as we've seen. And even globalism itself, it has a contradiction inherent in it. Globalists will say, you, under our system, have ultimate autonomy over your own life. And yet they will also say, and globalism is inevitable. It's the wave of the future. Nobody can stop it. To which you say, okay, well, which is it? You say, do I get to opt out of this globalism if I don't want it, or am I stuck with it? So much for being autonomous, kind of thing. So with that autonomy, where am I going to exercise my own sovereign choices? Well, that's where the consumer market comes in. The radical consumption, consumerism that comes into a globalist society tends to come through this notion of lifestyle values and the pushing away of traditions and customs and the things that tended to be timeless and that matter most. And the end result you get is Harry and Meghan. Yeah, right. So Queen Elizabeth and they're the Windsors, they're we don't need that anymore. We've gone beyond that. We have no loyalties to family or to nation or custom or tradition or anything like that. No, no, no. We're our own sovereign individuals. Will be defined more by Netflix now than anything else. So what the WEF is the centralized, mechanism, as it were, to guide that market, to guide that consumerism. And their basic premise is that governments are not responsible for the problems of the world. Corporations are not responsible for the problems of the world. Finance isn't the problem with the world, responsible for the problems of the world. You are.
Yeah.
You and I are consumers, right? Because of the lifestyle values. Consumers are the ones most responsible for all the problems of the world. Up until this point, the consumer's been king. The consumer's been able to say, "This is what I want. Here are my pain points. How are you going to solve them?" And then corporations would meet that niche. What the WEF is trying to do is reverse engineer that. They're trying to, in effect, say, no, 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 we need to guide the choices that you make. And what we need to do is convince you that by making these choices, you are more free, you are more healthy, you belong in a greener planet, blah, 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 blah. So in effect, what they're doing is they are deliberately trying to control our choices and control our consumptive habits by controlling what we can choose and what we can consume. So they're a very, very nefarious and dangerous organization, especially given the way they're able to affect elections. We now know that George Soros is the #1 financier of Democratic politicians. Fried was the #2, although Elon Musk insinuated the other day that he was #1, that he actually dropped a billion. We'll see. I haven't seen the evidence on that.
Yeah.
I know he said he was going to give $1 billion to Democratic politicians in 2024. We saw it even just in the last Georgia race the other day. So Warnock had a 3-to-1 money advantage over Herschel Walker. I mean, the Republicans are just out of the game right now. And this is what's so fascinating. It is the interplay between corporate and government, and we're seeing particularly in the Twitter files, that tends to be the heartbeat, the life of a globalist system, a centralized, standardized globalist system that sees the masses as objects of control and some kind of manipulation. And WEF is right there. And again, all it's doing in the end is just further exacerbating the populist revolt.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was really great, the way that you said that. Putting that blame on us, and so therefore they must control us and dictate our habits and our lifestyles through the illusion of choice. But at the end of the day, they're stripping away those choices to get us to choose their choice. We have freedom of speech, just have to use their words and their thoughts. So thank you so much.
They give you all the options, but you can't opt out of it.
Yeah. Well, again, that was very insightful. Speaking of insightful, I've noticed on your channel, you've been giving away some goodies going into the holiday season of books and information. Can my viewers get access to that, or is that exclusive to your community?
Absolutely, Stephen. I'd love to give it to your viewers. I love your audience. Yeah, we do. If you just click on the link below, we've got we've got tons of free stuff. But the one I'm really highlighting, especially as you and I are talking about, we call it our fake news antidote, and it's a wonderful resource to help you tap into a whole host of news sources that I use on a daily basis. These are all part of an increasing parallel economy that we talk about a lot. I know you talk about it. Elon Musk is more or less the de facto leader of it right now. But it is part of that, as we're talking about kind of this network society based sort of postmodern world that's rising up very organically. Well, you know, as part of that world, we're sick and tired of the attempt, well, the supposed notion that our legacy media alone have a monopoly over reliable information. We just don't buy that anymore. Nobody buys that anymore. As a matter of fact, all the information we have before they even get their hands on it, right? Just again, everybody with a camera, everybody with a phone is a cameraman kind of thing. So anyway, what we do is we list out and explain, compile a number of very reliable, very good news resources. And all you have to do is just click on the link and download it. You're going to absolutely love it.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to come on and share wisdom. Go check out Dr. Steve Turley's channel. I will use that link that you guys are going to send over. I'll put it down below so that they can get those informative goodies. But thank you so much for taking time to speak with me and share your wisdom with my YouTube community.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. God bless you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.